Okay, so I'm going to record this part. If you have questions at any point, let me know, and we can go over it. I'm happy to pause at any point. I'm going to just increase the size a little bit. And so we're going to learn about adding text. And so this is very similar to adding shapes, but we're going to have text. And so the text has characters. So we're going to look at how to do that. And then other than that, it still has the similar properties. Like it has a position with X and Y. It has a size with width and height. But the way that the size works is very different. It changes, the box where the text is. So we'll look at that. The reference is very helpful for this. So if we go to typography, you can see all the functions related to text. You can actually load fonts from other sources. We'll take a look at that in a little bit. But these are all the various functions related to text. So the main function is just the word text. That's what we'll start with. But then there's all these things that change the way the text looks on the page. So let's just get started with a basic example. So if I want to add some text to the page, I'm just going to write the word text. And then I have a string. So the text that we want to display is a string with the characters that we want to be part of our text. And so we don't really have to do much else because there's going to be like a default font and default styling. So I'm just going to type hello world. And from here, if I try to run this, I'm going to get an error because it doesn't know where to. Oh, wait, I put the semicolon on the wrong side. OK, I won't get an error, but we don't see any text. And we do get this message from P5 saying that we're expecting at least 3 arguments and received only 1. Okay, so this isn't actually an error. We can see our sketch is still running, but P5 is looking at this and saying, like, this isn't probably what you mean to do. And so this is a good example of, it tells us sort of what's going on, but it doesn't really explain exactly why this isn't working. So it says it's expecting 3 arguments, and it only got 1 argument. So we only got this first part, which is the text. If we go and look at the text, we can see, okay, it's asking for 3 arguments. So what are the other 3 arguments? So we can scroll down through some of these examples, and we can see our arguments. So the first argument is a string, the text to be displayed. Then we have the X value, the Y value. So this is the position. And then there are optional arguments for width and height. So we need to put an X, Y in here. So if I put 0, 0, we can see where the text should be, but it's not there because of the way that the text is displayed. So the text draws by default from the bottom of the characters. And so the reason we don't see it right now is because they're starting at 0 and going up. Okay, so we need to move it down. So let's move it down by 100. So there we see it. And we can move it over on X. And now we have our text. It's pretty boring because that's just the default. So I don't know what the pixel size is. It's probably maybe 16. But, that's the basic. That's what the default looks like. So let's look at some of our functions and change the way it looks a little bit. So I'm going to go back up here and go to typography. And so we can look at these. I'm not going to go in order here, but I'm just going to go through the ones that we want to look at. So we can change the size with text size. And so this is just the pixel height, so how tall the letters are. So if we set this to like 100, our text is going to be much bigger. One thing that is useful is once we make our text bigger, we might need to know how wide it is. So there's another function that will tell you that, which is text width. So text width looks like you can set the width, but that's not actually what it does. It tells you how wide the text is. Okay, so if I console.log, the way that I would do this is I would say text width, and then I would put in the string that I'm planning to display.
Why do we put console.log again?
So console.log doesn't do anything to the way that the program works. It just shows us information in the console. So it's used by developers to understand what's happening in the program. So it doesn't change what we see on the output at all. But what I want to do here is just find out how wide is the text. And so it can tell me right there it's about 500 pixels wide. So that's good to know. It's actually, this text is actually wider than the width of my entire canvas. So that's something that's good to know. I might want to make this smaller. For now, I'm just going to get rid of this, and I'm just going to make my text a little bit smaller, but I'm going to use that in a second to help with my design. Okay, so let's make the text smaller. I'm going to move it over. Okay, so it still doesn't quite fit, so I'm going to keep making it smaller until it fits inside here. There we go. Okay. That's close enough, but we're going to go back in a second and use that. Okay. So that's our text size. In terms of changing the color, it works just like any other shape. So if I want to change the inside color, I can change the fill. And we'll get a fill. And then if I want a stroke, I can do that as well. I can say the stroke is red. And it's very, very skinny because the stroke weight is the default of 1 pixel. So if I want to be able to see that better, I can turn up the stroke weight. But the higher the stroke weight we turn it up, we're going to start to see some weird effects. So if I do it like this, because there's a lot of geometry in the text, one thing you'll start to see is these edges. Okay, so let me make the text a little bigger. We'll see that. Yeah. Okay, so when we start to make the stroke really big, we see these like kind of gross edges, and that's because P5 is like doing these calculations based on the geometry of our font to figure out where that stroke should be. And if our stroke is too wide, you're going to start to see these weird places where it overlaps. There's 2 ways to deal with that if that bothers you. The easy way is just to make the stroke smaller. So just say, okay, I don't need it to be that wide. I'll just make something smaller. The more slightly complex way to do it, if you want to have like a nice, big stroke like that, but you don't want to see those edges, is you actually have to change the way that the canvas is set up. And this takes a couple steps. And so I'm going to demonstrate this. You don't have to do this, but I'm just going to demonstrate this because people often want to be able to do this. So if I want to change the settings of the canvas, I have to get a reference to the canvas. And so I can use a variable to do this. I can assign create canvas to a variable, and so it'll give me information. So I'm just going to say variable, let's just say canvas. I think I can use that. And then if I log that, again, I'm just doing this just to see what it is. So I'm going to log the canvas. So you can see this is what gets logged when we log the canvas. Just to make it clear, let's add a little label. So you can see there's canvas, and we see this thing called the renderer 2D. Renderer is just kind of a fancy word for graphics programs for what's doing the drawing on the screen. So if you guys have taken like 3D animation, you've used renderers there. If you've taken a video class, you like render out your video. Basically just means what's doing the actual drawing of colors and pixels on the screen. So we have a 2D renderer because we're just drawing a flat 2D drawing. And there's a bunch of stuff in here. So it tells us like this is the canvas that we're using in our HTML. But there's this thing in here, if we can find it, all the way down here somewhere. I don't see it. I must have passed it. Okay, here it is, the drawing context. Okay, so our drawing context is the actual canvas code that is created by the browser in JavaScript. And in there, you have a bunch of like rules about how your drawing is done. So most of the stuff we don't really think about, but there's things like, is the image smoothing enabled? Do we have a blur? There's all these things that we haven't really talked about yet, but that we can learn about. And right here, there's this thing called miter limit. And the miter limit, which we can see the default is 10, is the thing that kind of decides how to overlap those strokes. It's buried deep in here. So if we want to change that, what we can do is we can first get a reference to our canvas. Then we can say canvas dot, what was that called? I really should be able to remember this because I've done this so many times, but it's called drawing context.
I have a question.
Yeah.
What does that variable under the function setup, what does it do?
Say that again?
The variable under the function setup.
Oh, so remember, create canvas makes the canvas that we're drawing on. And usually we can just create it and we don't have to do anything with it. So we just create it and we just leave it there and then we draw on it later. But right now I want to change one of the settings. And so in order to change the setting, I first have to get a reference to it. So I'm assigning a reference to the canvas to this variable. So this is a little bit more advanced. We haven't really learned about, there's this thing called, eventually we'll learn about creating our own functions, and functions can return things, and that's what's happening here. So it's a little bit more advanced, but I'm just showing you guys this just in case you want to do this. Okay, so we can change the miter limit. So if I change the miter limit to 1, notice that those nasty little edges go away. But we get this weird sort of like bevel thing that's happening at the corners. So if I want corners and not bevels, I can set it to 2. Now I get these like flat corners instead of those beveled edges. I actually forget if I do 0. Okay, we go back to that. I don't know why. I used to know more about this, but I kind of forgot. Like, there's a certain point at which we see those edges, and then I think that's pretty much just it. It just stays like that. So 1 and 2 kind of make a difference. Everything else basically does the same thing. Okay, so this is, again, only if you really want to get rid of those edges. So I'll put a comment here that says, get rid of edges. Okay, so that was a little bit of a tangent. Let's get back into styling our text. So we have our fill, we have our stroke. That works the same way that you would expect it to work. I'm going to make the text a little bit smaller because we lost our exclamation point. Okay, so next we have, let's look at text font. So we can change the font of our text. The fonts that are available are going to be the default fonts on the browser. An easy way to find out what those are is to go to CSS Font Stack. This is a website that just shows you all the fonts. And so you can see the fonts. These are the sans serif fonts. So those are all, fonts that don't have the little feet. And the thing that's nice about this website is it shows you if they're available on Mac and Windows. So not every font is available on both. So depending on what you're working on or what you're designing for, you might want to work with one of these. Then there's the serif fonts. So if you want to use a font that's, just built in, we could choose one of these fonts, something that has decent support on both. Let's see. There really aren't a lot of these that have good support from both of them. Georgia does. That's a very common font, but it's not very exciting. Let's look up here. Okay, this one's pretty good. Oh, Trebuchet, that's a good one. Okay, let's use Trebuchet. So if I want to change the font to a default font, I can just do that. I can say text font, and then in quotation marks, this is like our color values. So it's a string data, so that's why we use the quotation marks. So I can change the text font, and it just is exactly like what it would say there. So I can say Trebuchet MS. And so we get a new font. So that's cool. If you want to get a font that's not one of the defaults, or get a font that will be supported on every browser, you can import a font either from a file or from Google Fonts. So if I want to get a Google font, I can go to fonts.google.com. There's other websites for this, but Google is just very straightforward and easy to use. I can search for a font. So let's find a cool font. There's no cool fonts. All right. Let's try some filters. Oh, that's what this is. They change every time I look at this website. Their design has changed. Wow, there actually is a lot of stuff on here. Okay, so let's preview. We're saying hello world. So let's find something that looks good in this.
What website did you use to find what fonts are already compatible?
That's the CSSFontStack.com. I'll put a link in the video for that. Okay, actually, I don't want a decorative or color font. Let's go with the slab serif. That might be kind of fun. Okay, these are kind of cool. All right, I'll just use this one. I kind of like this. So once you choose a font that you like, you have to add it. And this is easy to do. There's a big button that says Get Font. Oh, they really updated this. This is different than what it used to look like. So you can actually download the font. or we can just embed it. So I'm going to get embed code, and I'm going to embed it. You can do it either in HTML or CSS. I'm going to do this in HTML. Actually, this looks complicated. I'm going to go to CSS. That looks easier. Okay, so let's grab this string. You don't actually need these style. That's for if you have your CSS in your HTML. I just want this actual CSS code. So I'm going to copy that. Or actually, that's going to copy the whole thing. I'm going to copy this portion. And I'll go back to P5. And here I have to actually open one of my other files. So I'm going to go to CSS. Make sure this is at the top. And put that in there. And then they didn't put a semicolon. Come on, Google. Okay, so we should be able to use it now. And we just have to look at how they call it. So they call it like this. So I'm going to grab that. And I'm going to put this in my P5 and hope that it works. There we go. So that worked. Okay, so you don't have to do that, but if you want a font from somewhere else, that's what you could do.
How did you get the font in HTML?
I actually added it to CSS. So in Google Fonts, if you have a font that you've chosen, I forget where I started. Yeah, so if you have a font that you like, there's a button that says, well, now mine says remove, but it used to say add. And so you click on that, and that'll take you to this thing, I guess. They have like a shopping bag now. That's funny. And there's an embed code, and then you can copy the CSS from here.
How you can tell it's CSS?
There's on the web section, there's link and import. Link is for HTML. Import is for CSS. What? Oh yeah, just this top part has to go into your CSS. And you can add other weights and do a bunch of other stuff as well, but we're not going to do that for now. You don't have to do this. If you really want to do this, we can go over it in more detail later. But this is just an example of how you would add other fonts if you want to. So I'm going to keep going, but if there are more questions about this, we can go over them during our workshop.
In the CSS, where did you paste it?
Oh, so if you paste it into CSS, just make sure it's the first thing, because it won't affect anything if it comes afterwards. And they forgot a semicolon, so just make sure you add that in there. Okay.
So copy the whole entire code, right?
Actually, you only have to copy the import thing. They have it set into this like HTML section, but we're putting it into a CSS file, so we really only want the CSS component in there that's being in that style node in the HTML. And you can ignore this part, but this just shows you how it's called on the font side. So the font family name is all you really need from there. We can debug on your computer later if we need to. Okay, so let's go back to our sketch. We've added a cool font now. And so let's do a little bit more with this. We can change the text alignment. And this is where you can start to kind of like design things a little bit more. So I'm going to make this a little bit smaller just to make it a little more clear what's going on. And I'm going to move it over on X just a little bit. Okay. So with text align, the default, as we saw, is to draw from the bottom of the text. And actually, this is I have a good example of this over here. Let's go back over here for a second. I have some examples in these notes. Okay, so this shows the vertical or the horizontal alignment. So the default is that it's on the left, meaning that the text draws from left to right. If you set that to center, the text will be centered based on whatever the X value is. And if you send it to right, then the text will be to the right. It'll draw from right to left. And then for the vertical alignment, it's the default is for it to be at the bottom, meaning the text draws from the bottom to the top. You can set it to center, meaning it's in the center, or you can set it to top, meaning that it draws from the top down. So if we change the text align here, I'm just going to start with the horizontal. So the default is what we see, which is left. So if I do that, it won't change. If we go to center, it'll be centered at X. So everything moves over to X. And if I do right, we're not going to see it because it's going to move all the way over. So let's put this directly in the center of our canvas. So I'm going to put it at 200, 200. And so if I center, it'll be directly centered. And then the second parameter is optional, but you can set the vertical alignment with the second parameter. So the default is bottom. So if I type in bottom, well, it did move. Maybe the default is center. Maybe the default is top. Okay, I don't know what the default is. They all seem to move. Anyway, if we set bottom, it's going to draw from the bottom up. If we set center, it's going to be in the center. And if we set top, it'll go down. So depending on what your design is, if you have like a big box and you want to align, let's say we're like drawing a logo. Maybe we'll use a quick example. So let's say I'm designing a little logo. I have a rectangle up here, and it's going to be from, let's just put it at 0x and 200 y. Make it 200 wide and 200 tall, or 400 wide, 200 tall. So just divide our thing in half. And I'm going to say no stroke. Okay. So if we wanted to, design our text based on this logo, you might want to align it in the center. So you could do that. You might want it to be sitting on top, in which case you would align it to the bottom. You would do that, although it doesn't really look like it's that accurate. That's what it should be. And then if you want it to be all the way inside, you can set it to top. So that's why you have those options. So when you're designing stuff, you can align your text where you want it to appear on the canvas. Okay. So the last thing I want to go over is the width and the height of the text. Then I'll show just a couple simple examples of things that you can do to make the text interactive. That's just really for fun. But we'll do that in a second. So let's imagine we have a nice long piece of text. So I'm going to get some lorem ipsum from Google. If you're not familiar with this is just like dummy text that graphic designers use when they're laying out a magazine or something like that. So I'm gonna put this up here. I'm gonna save this in a variable. So that otherwise it's gonna take up a lot of space in my code and it's gonna look annoying. So I'm gonna make a new variable and I'm just gonna call this dummy text. And I'm gonna assign this to this long paragraph. So the reason I'm putting it up here at the very top of my program is that now I can scroll down and look at the rest of my code and not have this like big chunk of text in the middle. So this isn't a functional difference. This is a difference that just makes it easier to read the code. Okay, so now I'm going to draw my dummy text. Let's draw it actually above my hello world text. So I'm going to make a smaller text size because I have a lot of text. So I'm going to make this text size, let's do 18. And then I'm just going to draw my text. And so my first value now is not going to be a string. It's going to be that variable where I'm holding that long paragraph. So I'm going to put dummy text here. And I'm just going to put this at 0, 0 at the top of the canvas. Okay, so by default, you can see that my text is just stretching, across the canvas. It's not wrapping the way you would expect it to if you were doing something in, Microsoft Word or something like that. It's also centered, so let me set the text align back to default right now. So that's going to be the default. So we are going to have to move down on Y a little bit. But then we're going to start to change things around. So now we see that text, but it's stretching all the way out, and we can't see the whole thing. If we want to wrap the text so it goes down the page, we can add an optional width value. Okay, so if I set the width, I can set it to the size of my canvas, which is 400. And so if I set this to 400, now we are seeing the text, but it's drawing for the bottom. So maybe the default is top. There we go. Okay. So let's set this to top, so it draws from the top down. So now we see the text is coming down. It's wrapping the text. And it'll wrap to whatever I set that width as. So if I set the width as 200, it's going to squish it to that 200 pixels. So I'll go back to that default width. Now it's kind of like taking up all this space. Maybe you like that. Maybe actually I'll extend the width a little bit farther so that it like wraps beyond. So it's like, you know, maybe it looks kind of cool if it's just kind of taking up some space. That maybe looks kind of interesting. But if I want it to be readable and fit in here, what I probably want is to actually move it over a little bit, maybe move it down a little bit, and then move it to the side a little bit. So let's move it down on X by 18. Let's move it over, over on X, down on Y by 18. And then let's move it back. So we want to make that same margin on the right. We have to move it twice, right? Because it's the first margin plus another margin. So I'm just going to do minus 18 times 2. If I wanted to do that math, I could, but let's skip that for now. Okay, so now we have a nice little margin. We can see our text. There's a lot of, what do they call these, like hanging thingies where the line goes too long. So maybe I would play around with some other text properties. But that's basically what we can do to get our text to fit into the area that we want it to fit into. And maybe, you know, if I was smart, I would make a variable for the margin. I'd say variable margin equals 18. And so now I could say margin instead of 18. And so if I want to change the margin, I just can change my variable. So let's say that margin is too big. Let's try 12. Uh-oh. Did I spell something wrong?
The second margin.
Oops. Thank you. Okay. So now I can change my margin, and it updates the code without having to change all three of them. So that's just an example of another variable. Okay, so let's look at a couple other properties with our text that are easier to demonstrate with a paragraph. So one is leading, and the other is, where is it? Leading is what I want. I thought there was another one, but I don't see it on here. Okay, let's just do leading. Okay, so if I want to change the leading, that's the space in between lines. So I can say text leading. If I make it, you know, larger than the font size, it's going to space out more. So if I made it like 30, you can see there's more space between the lines. And if I make it smaller, then they're going to squish together. So leading is just how much space there is in between each line. And it's set to something like the font size plus a little bit, like plus a quarter or a half or something like that. So if we don't have this on by default, you can see there's like a little space. If you look closely between like the bottom of the P and the top of the L, you can see there's a little bit of space there. So there's enough space for it to be readable. But you know, maybe you don't need that much space. If we set it to the actual font size, you see they're just barely touching. So the bottom of the P and the top of the L are just barely touching when the leading is the same as the text size. So you can see that's the height of the line. I thought there was another, maybe this is a CSS thing, but I thought there was a way to change text ascent. This just tells you how tall or where the ascenders are. And descent. Text wrap. This just sets the wrap. This is word character. Oh, that's kind of interesting. You can change where it wraps on a word or a character. Anyway, so one thing that you can do that's kind of fun is we could set the text leading to like mouse X. So we can make the text, you know, interactive like that. We can move it a little bit or, you know, move it out, kind of squish it, do fun stuff like that. So you can add interactions into the text just like you would into your shapes or anything else. But we don't really need to do that. Let's leave this back like that. Let's see if there's anything else we want to cover. Oh, another fun thing you can do. Okay, last little thing. This is just like for fun. So another way that I can make the text interactive is I can change which characters I'm drawing. So if I have this like hello world here, one thing that we can do, let's set this to, oh, actually, you know what? This isn't going to make sense because I swapped. I'll talk about this on Wednesday because we haven't covered this yet. That's why. Okay, yeah. Usually there's like an order, but obviously I swapped the two classes, so this won't make that much sense. So I'll talk about that on Wednesday. I'll make sure to remember to go over that. But we're just gonna map the value, and it'll look kind of fun. Anyway, that's enough for text for now. I'll stop there. For today, we're just gonna work on this like meme logo assignment. So we'll add image in the second part of class. For now, you can work on just getting the text in. If you want to look for images, you can do that as well. And yeah, in the second part of class, I'll show you guys how to add an image, how to layer them together. That's easy. And that'll pretty much be it. If you have any questions, I know some of you guys might need help with some of the font stuff. We can look at that. If you have any questions about the previous stuff, we can also go over that as well. So we'll have some workshop time now until 3:40. We'll have our break from 3:40 to 4. At 4, I'll go over images, and then we'll continue, with the workshop time from there. Any general questions about the text stuff?
I was looking at the one that you did for the dummy text. Is there a variable they did for margin?
Yeah. I put that in the code here. So I put the variable for dummy text at the top just to get it out of the way. But I put the variable for margin down here. It doesn't really matter where you put them. I just did this because it's like I'm actually using it right here, so it's nice to be able to see it. Whereas this, like, I don't want to see that whole chunk of text in the middle of my code. So it's just really a personal preference thing. My font is also really big, so I don't have as much space to look at. Oh, the text? I just pasted it. So if I use this website, Lorem, if you just Google Lorem Ipsum, which is like a Latin word for something, there's like websites that will generate this dummy text for you. It's just used for, laying out stuff in graphic design. I'm surprised Google doesn't have their own little thing. Like, I feel like a lot of stuff they just show you. But yeah, there's a bunch of websites that do this. You can change how much of it you want. Like if you want more, you can put 10 here, click generate. Okay, I'm gonna. Oh, I just copied and pasted. So, oh, okay. Okay. Okay, so I'll leave that up, but I'm going to link to this. I'll add this to the class examples collection. Actually, let me give this a name first. Text example. So I'll add this to the collection, and then I'll link it in the video as well. So I'm going to